Good afternoon, welcome. Thanks for joining us. The goal of the next 15 minutes is to give you a checklist of best practices to train journalists in your newsroom, whether you're big or small, including trying to get those really busy, hard-to-get journalists who may be uninterested in climate, but really have to. And we want to give you kind of ideas and tips, things that we have tested to try and get those journalists to come to your trainings and sign up. Every journalist on stage will share concrete examples of what they have done and achieved in their own newsroom, and hopefully a lot of those will be replicable and applicable to other newsrooms. We're well aware this is 2025. There's wars, tariffs, trade war, a lot of other stuff happening in the world, and it's hard to keep climate as a priority in the newsrooms. We live it every day. But training is a solution for that, and we'll get into that. We will leave half of the time for questions from the audience if you have any, so think about it. And I'll start with Audrey. Audrey, you're the climate editor for France's biggest media group. You have 5 channels, you reach 80% of the French population. This is a huge, huge media group, very important, and you did something quite unique. I don't think I've seen that at that scale anywhere else. You've made climate training mandatory for all of your journalists. And it's not a 1-hour online training, so you're going to get into that. And I think so far you've trained 700 of your 2,500 journalists in over 20 locations. How did you manage to get that training mandatory?
Hi, everyone. So it's really hard to force a journalist to do something he or she doesn't want to do, as you know. So mandatory is a word that we are not going to use, but we are going to be very clear in terms of incentive, so that journalists actually go to the trainings. And it's on the management, basically. Managers really need to go and insist on journalists so that they just attend the trainings. It really started in the beginning with IPCC scientists coming to us and telling us, okay, guys, we think that your coverage is not good enough and we need you to have a better coverage. So they asked if they could come and train our managers, which they did, in the spring of 2022, so 3 years ago. And it really worked.
Can you remind everyone what happened in 2022 in France?
So after that, during the summer of 2022, there was a terrible drought, terrible heat wave all over Europe, basically. But even before that, we had this training with IPCC scientists, which was great because it was really targeting the management roles, the editors, and a lot of them understood the climate story at that point. And starting there, we really shifted a lot of the newsroom's strategy on climate coverage. And part of it was doing this new training program, which aims at training all the newsrooms, so all beats, everyone. We have over 2,500 journalists, so that's a really, really big newsroom all over the world. And as you said, we've already trained 700 during 2 days training. So this is really long. For those who don't realize, having 2 days of the week of a journalist to get trained is really, really ambitious. And we asked them to come to a different location than the newsroom so that they are not distracted and they stay focused on the training. And as it was the case for the IPCC scientists coming in the newsroom, we have a very science-based orientation for those trainings. And so we have 2 scientists at least coming to train our journalists during those 2 days, which is like serious.
Explain a bit more why you make them come to Paris and why you don't do it online. What happens in those groups?
Yeah, those are small groups. We ask them to come, and it's maximum 15 people. And the aim of that setting is that they're able to speak among themselves, talk among themselves, have conversation, have debates, editorial debates about like how do we do it, what is the way that we could apply climate context in our beat, and everybody should be able to have their say and have this discussion. So it's really a setting made for journalists to talk about the things that can be hard for them in terms of like, say someone covers health and they don't think it's going to be something important for them, and it's important that they are able to talk about this, to imagine how they can integrate climate context inside their own coverage. And so the aim of having them in person is really so that we have that kind of collective discussions all together and that they're not distracted by something else, basically.
Of course, not every newsroom has the resources and the means to send everyone to Paris or in a central location. So I'll turn to Anna now. You're at CBC and you do everything online. How does that work?
Yeah, so I run a content unit that covers health science and climate, and we do national news, current affairs to radio, TV, and digital across the country, but we're not the only ones that are doing these stories, and obviously we don't want to be the only ones doing these stories. So a few years ago, our editor-in-chief made climate change coverage a priority for CBC News, and from there, editorials leaders really asked for this climate reporting essentials course. And so what we did was we had two of our journalists who are highly experienced in covering science and climate build out this course, and it's structured to be a one-day online course. We have offered it in person a few times in Toronto, but we sort of found that because we cover an enormous country that goes from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean and up to the Arctic Ocean, and covers 4 time zones, that online is really the best way to be able to access all of the different reporters we have across the country and in the different localities. But it's also worked out really well online. We tend to have these sort of very open discussions in both the online environment and in the in-person environment, where people, if they're all from a similar beat, like business, they can talk about some of the challenges they face, or if they're from a particular region, we can hear about how climate change is affecting the people in their area, and we can sort of contour the course a little bit as we go.
What I find, in my experience, it's really difficult to get people to attend online sessions or not do something else when they do the training online. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so we've been running these for just over a year. We've done about 15 sessions. I have 2 more that we're lining up with about 100 journalists that have come. And one of the ways that's worked is initially there were challenges. People didn't know, should I be coming to this session? Climate change isn't in my job title. Is the course meant for me? And of course it is meant for them. And so once we realized where some of those hurdles were, we actually had our editor-in-chief talk to the senior managers at one of the regular meetings and say, this is a priority and we want to make sure that we do have people enrolled in these courses. And it sort of changed I think the perception of who the course was for, and made sure that managers also knew that they were being encouraged to have their journalists, their producers, their copy editors, anyone who did journalism to come to this course. So that helped a lot. And we've done a few other little things too, just to remind people that the course is there. We've had a lunch and learn about the challenges of climate reporting. It was a 1-hour session, and let people know about the course there. We've also, I think, just through word of mouth, we sort of have a Google space where the alumni from the course can talk about what they've done since they've been through the course, or seek some assistance from each other or from the trainers themselves. And the feedback we get is that they're encouraging other people from within their newsrooms or colleagues that they have elsewhere within the organization to come to the course as well. So it's sort of been a combination of top-down, but also word of mouth. And we also get to know some of the people who are interested in writing about climate. We see their stories as they appear on air or online. And if we think there's sort of an enthusiasm there, we can make suggestions that somebody might benefit from taking this course, because they can dig deeper.
I mean, this is a huge organization, CBC, right? You have 2,000 employees, mostly journalists, 48 locations, soon to be expanded to close to 70 bureaus. I mean, there's a lesson here in both of your examples. You need push and buy-in from the top, from leadership. That's what happened in both of your groups. But that applies to small newsrooms as well. I mean, at AFP, it's the same. We had a new chief editor in 2019, and we declared that the future of the planet was a priority, and it started a wave of changes within AFP, and I guess it's the same for you guys. Mark of Covering Climate Now. Audrey explained that one of her tricks is to generate debate on climate change in those small groups physically, right? We know there can be reluctance among journalists, some journalists, to engage on climate. And at Covering Climate Now, you did something quite impressive, actually. You convinced the leaders of Sinclair, and you're going to tell us who Sinclair is, in the US, to let you train their journalists on climate change. How did you convince them?
Thanks you for that question, Ivan. And I want to just begin by saying, thank you for that question, Ivan. And I want to just begin by saying that it is wonderful to see so many young people here. Other of us, not so young. But this is your story. This is I have a 20-year-old daughter. This is the story of the rest of your life. Every journalist in the 21st century is going to be a climate journalist, whether they know it or not. So you're here early, and it's going to help you. Covering Climate Now, we are a global media collaboration of nearly 600 news organizations, including, I'm happy to say, AFP, The Guardian. We're about to announce that France Télévisions is also going to be a partner. So we are organized by journalists, for journalists, to help all of us do a better job of covering the big story of our time. To answer your question, Yvonne, how did we convince, so I'm from America, from the United States, and we have trained the newsrooms of NBC News, of CBS News, of Telemundo, Univision, many others. But Sinclair is, how many people here know the name Sinclair? 1, 2, 3. How many people here know the name Fox News? A lot more. Fox News is to the left of Sinclair. Okay? Sinclair is an ownership group. It owns about 86 television stations, local television stations across the United States. You would think that they would never be interested in climate training. But as Yvonne says, we have trained a number of them, and we have trained them in the state of South Carolina, which is where the Civil War began, 165 years ago. It's a very conservative or red state. And the way we did it was we applied one of the basic rules of thumb in journalism, which is follow the money. Follow the money. By which I mean, when we talk to every newsroom, the first thing we say to them is, look at the data, look at who your audience is. 70%, that's a 70% of your audience wants more information about climate change. More, not less. And how many people don't want it? It's about 10%. They're a very loud 10%, they're a nasty 10%, they yell at you online, but they are 10% of the population. And if you're running a news operation, it should not be a hard business decision to decide, am I going to channel my coverage for the 70% who want to hear about climate change, or am I going to be quiet about climate change in deference to 10%? That's an easy business call. And that is why Sinclair, but also NBC News, has made a decision at the corporate level that in their weather coverage, they are going to emphasize climate change going forward. And they're doing that because they look at the data, and they also look at the fact that these weather events are happening harder and harder and more often all the time, and their audiences are wondering what is going on. And so these stations at Sinclair, and Fox as well, we've trained Fox, and at NBC, they see a business opportunity. They want to be the station that those audiences come to for climate expertise. So it's the same principle, and then I'll stop talking. It's the same principle behind a project that I want to invite all the journalists here to be involved in, that we're starting in about 10 days, called the 89% Project, covering climate. Now, every newsroom in the world is invited. We're going to do a week of coverage starting April 21. With AFP, with The Guardian, with a lot of other newsrooms, that we are going to be exploring a pivotal but little known fact about climate change, which is that 80 to 89% of the world's people want their governments to take stronger climate action. 80 to 89%, that's based on science, social science. But this overwhelming majority does not know that it's the majority. And that's partly because our coverage does not reflect that fact. Neither the news coverage nor the social media coverage. And we're going to change that week of April 21. I invite all of you to come up later for more information about that.
But give us a bit more examples of more concrete details on how you train those local stations. How did you adapt in any way the climate trainings you did specifically for them, including on the language? How do you talk about climate change?
We absolutely did. We began by applying a very basic rule of communication. Send the right messenger. When we went to these stations in South Carolina, in North Carolina, in Georgia, which are all down in the southeast near Florida, we didn't come in as these New York journalists. We hired a local TV journalist who had worked in the Carolinas for most of his career. He knew some of these people. And when he began the conversations, as you do down south in the United States, you don't talk about business for the first 15 minutes. For the first 15 minutes of the conversation, you're talking about the weather and what did you have for dinner last night. So there was trust that developed. That was the first rule. We sent the right messenger. And then we started by also talking to the people inside of those newsrooms who are going to be the most receptive. Young people, the younger journalists on staff who have a very different attitude towards climate than the older ones, and the weathercasters. Those are the people that we talk to, because again, the weathercasters as scientists, they know that climate change is affecting the weather. So that's where we started, and that combination, I think, of sending the right messenger and explaining that this was a business opportunity was key. And then the final thing I'll say is that, yeah, we, again, this is part of good communication. Know your audience. Meet your audience where your audience is. Not where you wish your audience was. Meet them where they are. And so our colleagues at these stations said, look, we cannot use the word climate change. It will turn off our audiences. We're like, okay, let's find a solution to that. So we talked about how to do that, and they came up, and after we did 4 trainings, and the station put together their first ever special on climate change, 30 minutes, and they called it Mercury Rising. Mercury rising. Mercury, at least in the United States, it's the chemical that's in the thermometer that tells you that. But the best part of it was they scheduled this 30-minute broadcast, which had 0 climate denial in it. It was solid journalism. It wasn't exceptional, but it was totally solid journalism. They scheduled it right before the college football game on Friday night, which is the primest of prime time in television schedules, especially in the American South. That's by far the biggest moment. And they had a big success with it. And so now, because they had a big success, we're doing more with them, and we are talking to their bosses at the corporate level, that is to say the bosses who control the 86 stations across the country, about providing the same opportunity.
Audrey, maybe on adapting the language of climate change training, is it something you thought about?
I'd say that when you work in TV, especially in TV networks that have a really wide audience, there's never a question about language in terms of, you know, that if you want to reach the people that you need to reach, that you reach every day, you need to have a comprehensive language. So we never use the word mitigation. We're never going to say oh, tonight a story about mitigation. We're going to say, tonight we're going to talk about an initiative to lower emission in X part of France. And so the question of language is not something it is every day something that we do. And so I would say that it's really a question of show, don't tell, rather than the words we use, of course, need to be very comprehensive. And the other thing that we try to do is, rather than changing the language, is changing the places where we put climate reporting and put it in leading spaces. We did with the weather. The weather forecast now has a climate context every day. We do it in the main newscast. The idea is not to create new sections about climate, but rather put it in the places that are already leading and already having great audiences.
Anna, also, maybe, on the language, how you phrase?
Yeah, it's similarly, during the course, we introduce the journalists to the language that they might see in climate reports and scientific studies, but it's more to have them gain a certain confidence and an understanding, and then we sort of warn them that this is jargon and you shouldn't be using it at the same time, but at least so that they don't feel that there's a barrier to them to accessing the information and trying to explain it. But it comes down to that these are stories about people. We are telling them that, that they should be seeking out their local stories, the solutions that are there. And so it's really about finding those stories that are close to them and close to their audience, as opposed to finding stories and using that have very difficult scientific terms involved in them or anything like that. And similarly, we also have some new products that are coming out, like videos that are fronted by popular meteorologists that sort of explain some of the climate science behind some of the weather or other phenomena that we might see in the country. So it's a similar sort of program where we're looking at where people are and who people engage with to try and tell some more climate stories in that way.
And I guess I could share at AFP a few things on that topic of language. We're trying to spell out coal, oil and gas instead of fossil fuels. It's win-win because it's more concrete. I'm not sure everyone understands fossil fuels. So now we do that. We try to. Or one thing we're trying to change also, we work really hard. I mean, AFP, for those who don't know, it's 150 bureaus. We're a news agency. We have people in a lot of different places. So what we're trying to do now is remove the kind of boilerplate. Scientists say climate change makes heat waves and floods more frequent and intense. That's fine, but I don't think a lot of people actually read that. And often it's at the bottom of stories, and it's boring, and it's the paragraphs you don't read. Now we're trying to put high up in the stories an explanation of the phenomenon, because we explain that storms, heat is the fuel for storms, because hot ocean means more evaporation. Hot air can contain more water, and this is fuel for the storm. So we explain that. It happens that the water temperatures were the highest it's ever been recorded last month in that area. So we try to be more concrete, and have more explanation. And this is much more efficient than just saying climate change makes scientists say, etc., etc. One more thing I want to ask you before we get to your questions, if you have any, it's how do we measure the impact of training? How do we make sure this is efficient and it leads to actual change in your content, but also in the audience? Anyone has something to say on this?
I think that example I gave earlier is a pretty good impact assessment. When you see a station like Sinclair do their very first climate special ever, and they put it on right before the college football game, that's good impact.
At France Télévisions, it would be really hard to pinpoint because we've made so many changes at the same time. The training, a new department, climate department, covering only climate and environmental stories. So there's been so many changes in 2 years that it's hard to know what is the training and what is the rest. But clearly, I think but I'm not the best person to ask, that the newsroom has leveled up very much, the coverage. But it's hard to pinpoint what is the actual, the main action behind this.
I'll just add that, I mean, we could sort of take a quantitative look at it and look at the metrics and, you know, are the stories that are tagged with climate change, do we have more of them? But that isn't necessarily the best metric because they may not have been tagged appropriately, but also it doesn't necessarily reflect the quality of the stories. And if we're really sort of elevating them beyond a report or just using the word climate change that's in there. And so I think we have some qualitative idea just from the discussions that we have with the alums from the course in terms of them showcasing, sending links to us about, hey, I did this story, thanks for your help on this. And so we have a sense that people they're thinking of it more. They're thinking of how climate might fit into their beat or in their locale stories. So it's qualitative. It's not perhaps the easiest metric to sort of use, but it is something, and it's something we need to think more about too, I think.
Can I ask you, Audrey, about in purely quantitative terms, on French TV, is there more climate coverage now compared to 2-3 years ago?
So in the Reuters Institute study on climate information, climate news, one thing that we saw was that the French population was one of the most informed on climate. It was the highest, I think, of all countries that were surveyed. The numbers were 60% of French people had information on climate during the past week, every week, I think. And television was by far the thing that they got their information from. It was 41% of them was saying it was coming from TV. And this is an increase compared to years ago. So I think clearly, I don't know about the quality, I think it's good quality, but the quantity of news that they receive clearly is far higher than it used to be.
Okay. Well, thank you. Now we can take questions if you have any. So raise your hand. Is there a microphone for? Where is the microphone? Can someone get it? Please, thank you.
Working? Thank you very much for this session. It was very instructive. I think it's very encouraging to see that many media outlets are taking the lead and training their journalists on climate issues. I work for an NGO, a French NGO called Quota Climat. And I have like a different view. I would say that, well, at national, EU and global level, we're seeing the quantity level of environmental information decreasing. There's an observatory in France now that has been created for that. There's a 30% decrease from 2023 to 2024. And at the same time, there's a surge of climate disinformation arriving in traditional media outlets. We've detected 128 cases of climate disinformation in mass media outlets in France. So it's coming and it's coming big. And the problem is that when it's coming in traditional media, it's being normalized, rationalized. So I was just wondering, for you and your respective organizations, how are you approaching those challenges? And are you staying optimistic about keeping your journalists climate literate? Thank you.
Who wants to take it? Anna? CBC.
I can start with a little bit. One of the things that we do in the courses is we talk. We spend some time on focusing on experts and who is an expert from different perspectives as well. And so really sort of having the journalists think about who are they interviewing and why are they interviewing them, and are the quotes that they're including in their articles relevant to their expertise, so that we don't have a mismatch of someone making a sort of broad statement about an industry or a solution or something where they may not be actually the most informed in that area. And so to really to pause and question about, who are they interviewing, what are their sources, and how are they conveying these ideas, and to question some of the terminology and the language that some sources might be using. Is something really net zero? Are they counting all the emissions? Those types of things, so that they're a little more aware of some of the pitfalls that can come with climate journalism and can be thinking about that in their reporting.
I can answer something on the part of your question regarding the fact that there's less, according to your numbers, less climate content on French TV, and on some French TV, I guess. I think the trick is a training can be a solution. If you get the political editors, the sports editor, the culture editor, the chief editor of those outlets, newspaper, TV, radio stations, you kind of open their eyes in a climate training, and I think that's a way for them to cover climate, not on climate change per se, but on the effect of their own beat and their relationship between their own beat and climate. That's how, I mean, I think the Oxford Climate Journalism Network tries to do that, getting non-climate reporters and editors to do climate training. I think this is very efficient, and I mean, we're trying to do that, and we see the change. I mean, an editor it takes an hour to change an editor's view on climate. Anyone else?
Two things. One on disinformation. This is going to be a huge growing problem because of who owns social media these days, and that's where most of the disinformation is coming. So the organization UNESCO is trying to implement a program in the lead up to COP30, the climate summit that happens in November in Brazil, at the request actually of the Brazilian government and the United Nations Secretary General Guterres. UNESCO is trying to lead a program on fighting climate disinformation. They've talked to us at Covering Climate Now about having traditional media step up and actively identify and debunk this disinformation, because most of that disinformation travels through social media, and we know who owns that now. They're very happy to disinform the public. So keep an eye out on that. We want to create what we're calling a disinformation disruptor hub, where journalists in real time can alert one another across country lines to the lies that are coming out. For example, the Los Angeles fires of about 6 weeks ago, there was disinformation that came from both Trump and Musk saying that the problem was that there wasn't enough water in the hydrants because of little fish were protected, and there was a black woman who was mayor of Los Angeles, and that was the problem. And unfortunately, a lot of news organizations took that seriously and framed their reports as if that was a real fact. If we had a disinformation disruptor in place during those fires, that disruptor could have said to all the reporters, hey, this is bullshit, don't report it, right? So we're trying to do that. And then quickly on the other thing, if I understood your point, that coverage has gone down in 2023. That is because of something that we always face in the media, which we call the tyranny of the immediate. The tyranny of the immediate. When there is a war going on, when there is tariffs coming out of a crazy person in the White House who is threatening to basically send the world economy into depression, no newsroom in the world is not going to lead their stories with that. You have to lead your story with that. That's what's happening right now. We call it news because it's new, right? But it makes it hard for those of us in climate to keep the climate story at the top of the agenda, the tyranny of the immediate, which again is why we're starting this 89% project, to say, wait a minute, the public wants this information, let's lean into that.
And I'll just finish by saying that one of the things that we try to do to avoid that also is to disinformation, I'm talking about here, is to give more space to scientists and scientists' voices, because we know they are highly trusted by the public. In France, there's been some studies that show that they are the most trusted voices to talk about climate, which is obvious, but it still is very specific to France. So this is something that we really try to do. We try to create more bridges between the scientific community and the journalists, and to give more space to science on TV, basically.
The gentleman here, where is the microphone? Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I just have a question about fossil fuel producer, if you allow me. Is part of your training telling your journalist, your media operator, how to interact with all those pressure groups that are very strong, that are the fossil fuel producer, they are using a lot of greenwashing. And how do you tell them how to react, how to resist? Because, for example, I understand very well your point on mercury rising in North Carolina or South Carolina. Yeah, but then you have also to tell them that ExxonMobil has to stop using oil, has to cut down emissions. In France, you have to tell them that Total Energy is doing something that has to finish.
I have a very good answer. I agree, it's really hard, and especially with anything that's green communication, green marketing. So 3 years ago, we realized that our business reporters were not really equipped or trained to understand all the green communication coming from companies. And companies were way ahead of journalists. So we actually started a very practical workshop on how to detect greenwashing. It's basically training journalists on carbon accounting, scope 1, 2, 3, if you know what I mean, if you don't take the training. And so 300 people in our newsroom, business reporters, general news reporters, foreign correspondents have taken now a course on how to detect greenwashing. It's literally based on case studies, press releases, and how do you understand and decipher all the green communication. And what's the end result of that is that we know when it's a credible environmental initiative and when it's likely to be greenwashing, and so that our coverage is much stronger. And we're not the only ones doing that. Now OCGN is doing greenwashing training. I think that's your answer. You do trainings that start from a need, right? The newsroom is not equipped, so you develop something for those reporters. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
Could I add in there, one of the things we do at Covering Climate Now, because we realized that we were not getting through to some of these reporters, just on terms of making the climate connection to weather, was that we did a whole session on what we called the 10 climate myths that are holding back your reporting. And we explained to these TV reporters that you have been lied to, systematically lied to by the fossil fuel industry for 40 years. And here's the 10 myths that you have been told, that the scientists don't agree, that it's not man-made. What about China? All of those myths. And when we explained those myths, and especially when we said, these myths have been implanted into your brain over the last 40 years by the fossil fuel industry, a propaganda campaign, that was when the light bulb went off in their head. Because no journalist, I don't care if you're right wing, left wing, or no wing, no journalist likes to think that they have been fooled, right? And as soon as they learned that they had been lied to for 40 years, the rest of our trainings, they were much more receptive, much more understanding of what the point was.
Thank you. Question here or in the back? Yeah. All right. I don't know who was first.
Thank you. It's good to know that we have a session on climate change here at IJF. I'm Imelda Abanyo. I'm a program manager for Internews Earth Journalism Network, but I'm based in the Philippines. So we have been organizing a lot of trainings as well, and sending or organizing fellowships called the Climate Change Media Partnership for the developing and middle-income countries for the COPs. We've also providing story grants, toolkits, and trainings on climate change issues, and lately collaborating with social media content creators. And I myself have been covering the climate change talks for 15 years. But my question is, do you think newsrooms should really encourage some journalists to specialize, not just train, specialize in reporting on climate change? And do you think funders should make more support available for journalists covering climate change and the environment? Thank you.
I mean, my answer is yes, yes, yes.
I was going to say something similar, at least to your first question. We do have a specialized team of climate reporters, but we also want to make sure, because we have so many different regions and local stations, that those people are also equipped to be able to cover it as well.
Go ahead.
I'm going to say my yes, 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 before you go ahead.
I want to give a real shout out to Earth Journalism Network. If you don't know who they are, go and talk with her later. They've been doing really righteous work for a long time in this field. And yes, of course, funders should do that. However, I'm going to disagree a little bit, I think, with my colleagues in answer to your question about whether people should be trained specifically for a climate desk. I think the answer depends. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And it largely depends on how much resources a particular newsroom has. As you know, many newsrooms, especially in the Global South, do not have a lot of reporters. And yes, we can ask funders to fix that, but in the short term, we have to deal with the reporters we have. And I think it's, frankly, not terribly realistic that a newsroom, let's say, that has 6 reporters, or say 4 reporters and 2 editors, you know, they've got to be covering crime, weather, sports, all of the other politics. It's not realistic to do that. And it's also not necessary, is the deeper point. I think it's much more important, and we've talked about this, and we try to do it in our trainings, to make every journalist understand, as I said earlier, we're all climate journalists in the 21st century. It's just some of us realize it sooner. If you're covering politics and you're not aware that climate is part of your beat, we need to fix that. There is a climate connection to pretty much every beat in the newsroom. And if we only keep climate over here, the danger is that the only people who read or watch or listen to our coverage are going to be the people who already care about that. Remember, 89% of the public wants action, right? We need to be, when we're talking about sports or politics or business or anything, we need to be bringing the climate into the rest of our coverage, not siloing it on the side.
So I'll share a bit of our experience at Agence France-Presse. In the beginning, we did trainings, and all the journalists who are interested in climate and environment signed up. So we got a few hundred people. But then I really we're 1,700 journalists, so I really wanted to reach the rest of them. And that gets tricky because, you know, who wants to spend 2 hours on climate science? And, you know, your sports editor doesn't have time, doesn't think it is concerned. So we kind of changed tactic over time. And now we're offering 1 hour and even 30 minutes online session on how to cover heat waves or stuff like that. Very practical, very short. I basically make it very hard for someone to say I don't have time. And we got like a few more, like hundreds of our journalists signed up to those very short, quick trainings. So maybe that's another advice, a piece of advice I would give to newsroom. If no one comes to the one-day training, to the 1 hour training, just do 30 minutes.
And I would totally add to that you should have scientists come when there's a news breaking and something really important happens and that links to climate change. You need to have a scientist come in and have journalists, even at lunchtime, like half an hour, and he or she is going to explain the main facts and the main thing to understand. And it's basically free because the scientist is not going to be asked to be paid to do this. I mean, maybe he is or she is, but I mean, at France Télévisions, many scientists come and they just do it because it's part of their job to tell what they know, to say what they know. So this is something easy to do. You just need to do it at a moment where journalists really need the information, and they're going to listen because it's going to be something that's needed, really. And for the training, we have the same kind of issue. Like at first, it's only journalists that are interested that are going to come. And then you need the management to come in and make sure that everybody goes to it, and the incentive needs to be high, and the push from management needs to be high, and it's pretty much every day. But you need people to do that, so you need people in management who have a title with climate in it, whose job it is to make it go forward, or otherwise it doesn't.
Another question here. Oh, sorry. Catherine Dunn has been raising her hand. Oh, here. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
And then you're next, and then in the back
sorry.
also.
Yeah, hi, I'm...
So 3 more, and
And then
7 minutes.
I'll be fast. Yeah, I'm Catherine from the Oxford Climate Journalism Network, and you're all doing amazing work, and the 89% project is great, so that's great to see. And I am curious because I think, yeah, 3 of you have been in the OCGN, so you see that sometimes when you bring people in to talk about climate journalism, especially once you start getting in the people who are maybe not running towards it, sometimes, let's say, a lot of emotions come up. It's very intense. And sometimes also when they're going out into the newsroom and they're facing some resistance, that can be really like emotionally hard for them. So how does that come up in your training? How do you incorporate that? Do you talk about it later? How do you think about that aspect?
The resistance, you mean?
Not the resistance, like more of like, I don't want to use the word despair, but the despair is sort of the distress when people who haven't done climate news are really faced with the scientific facts and you know, or maybe they already know and now they're in this room where they're really going to talk about it for the first time potentially. Yeah.
I would say this is one of the reasons why we do 2 days of trainings as opposed to just a morning. It's because the first day you have the basic science and you understand the facts of like geophysics, a climatologist comes to tell you. Then in the afternoon, you're gonna have adaptation, mitigation, like what the science says about what we can do about it. And then the second day, you come up with solutions, and that's important. And then you're gonna talk to your colleagues and you're gonna debate about what you can do journalistically about it. And it's important to be together in that kind of moments and not just in front of your computer, which is one of the reasons why we do this in 2-day sessions with people in person to make sure that everybody is in there together and not alone in anxiety, basically. And I think the discussion is the most important part. What happens on the second day, basically, is making sure that people can express what the feelings that they have, because it's not very easy. I mean, it's clearly something that gets to you because it's about the future of your kids, it's about the future of everyone, basically. So that's not something very, I mean, you did a mental health survey recently, and I think it's important to stress that people who cover climate, I mean, it's not an easy thing for you personally either, so it needs to be accompanied by, you know, the rest of the newsroom.
So the gentleman in the back raised his hand, and then it's you. No? Okay. So in the white shirt. And in the meantime, this is kind of a tip sheet of what we've said. So feel free to take a picture, or there's a few examples also from the BBC. Was a mandatory 1-hour reporting climate change course. Deutsche Welle in Germany also does a lot. And I wanted to highlight also the journalism networks that are offering a ton of stuff, often free. The Oxford Climate Journalism Network, the applications for next year open in September, if I'm not mistaken. Earth Journalism Network, online courses that people can take now. It's online, it's self-administered. And you can also get training through grants. Of course, Solutions Journalism Network, and also the Bonn Institute, they offer a ton of resources. So, and they're here in Perugia, so talk to them. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I think I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle. I work with CMCC, which is a climate research institute, and I think our issue is we have the facts, we have the scientists, we have the latest research, but we struggle sometimes to put it out in simple language or to make it accessible to newsrooms. So maybe if you could, as in, help us, what advice could you give to us who are working on that communication side to get the latest stuff out that isn't always very...
Are you working with scientists?
Yes,
experts?
Absolutely, yes.
Well, if they can be available for interview right away, it usually helps. If they're clear, if they're, you know, they have to work on their own communication skills. You know, when there's breaking news and there's floods, we're sending people covering that flood or that heat wave. What we try is to have the scientific context, the scientific explanation behind it, and we need that right away. We don't have the luxury of waiting 2 days for an interview. So I would say that's the #1 thing. Anyone else?
Yeah, the #1 thing is as Ivan says, learn how to tell your scientists to learn how to talk like human beings. Imagine that they're talking to their children or their neighbor.
Don't
right?
say mitigation. Don't say reducing greenhouse gas emission.
Yeah, no, I'm not being negative here, but it really is helpful. You can have them do a 2-hour course in how to talk to the media. And, you know, most scientists, to be blunt, do not know how to do that. They have to be able to talk clearly and simply. Again, imagine if you're talking to your mother-in-law about it, or your neighbor, or whatever. You don't start talking about 450 parts per million. You start with maybe like in South Carolina, have you noticed that there's more flooding? Yes, everybody knows there's more flooding. And then you can tell them, well, that's because of da.
Maybe Anna, and we have 1 minute left, so.
Speed and speed really in terms of responding to what is going on in the news. So if you have someone who's got expertise, or several people, say these are the people who can talk about these issues, they're ready today. And I guess from the other side of things, if you're trying to have journalists report on a publication that's coming out, make sure the scientist is available before the publication is public, because the number of times we try and reach a lead author and they're not available it happens. And so it's hard to do coverage if the scientists are not available to comment on their own research.
And I'll finish by saying that one thing that we do to help scientists is that we ask them the questions of the audience. We have sort of a participatory feature in one of our programs. And the thing that works really well is with questions from kids. We tell them it's an 8-year-old asking the question, so be clear. And they try 10 times, sometimes 24 times if needed. But in the end, you will have an answer that is understandable by everyone, including maybe the 8-year-old. But mostly everyone will be able to understand. And that's one way that we try to help scientists think about this. It's like, think about the people you're talking to. You're not talking to a journalist, you're talking to an audience. And so imagine who you're talking to, and usually the language changes and they're not going to use jargon as much.
Thanks to our speakers. Thanks for coming, and thanks for your questions. And we're here, so come to us. Thank you.
Thank you.